Hello everyone and welcome back to WRLWND Radio. This is Marcelo Sugdeo. Phone addiction is causing loneliness, anxiety, and depression and has been considered in a new study as substance abuse. Some phone vendors are telling Android users that they have the latest security updates, while it's not so. And in search of the perfect voice for virtual personal assistants. Smartphones are an important part of our lives, allowing us to stay connected all the time. The downside of this, though, is many are becoming addicted to the constant pings, chimes, vibrations, and other alerts from our devices. With the constant onslaught of notifications, we are unable to ignore new emails and text messages. In a new study published in the NeuroRegulation, it argues that overuse of smartphones is just like any other type of substance abuse. The study pointed out that behavioral addiction to smartphone use begins forming neurological connections in the brain in ways similar to how opioid addiction is experienced by people taking Oxycontin for pain relief. And this is a serious matter. Our addiction to smartphones is like substance abuse. So this is like being hooked on alcohol or drugs. And that is how bad our behavior is becoming toward our phones. On top of that, addiction to social media technology may actually have a negative effect on social connection. In a survey of 135 San Francisco state students, they found that students who use their phones the most reported higher levels of feeling isolated, lonely, depressed, and anxious. They believe that the loneliness is partly a consequence of replacing the face-to-face interaction with a form of communication where body language and other signals cannot be interpreted. They also found that those same students almost constantly multitask while studying or even watching other media, eating or attending classes. And this constant activity allows little time for the bodies and the minds to relax and regenerate, and also results in semi-tasking, where people do two or more tasks at the same time, but half as well that they would have if it's just focused on one task at a time. I was at a training event a little while ago, and the presenter was talking about the subject of multitasking. And he asked everyone to write out the alphabet from A to Z, and then to write the numbers from 1 to 26. So 2 tasks. And he asked us to time ourselves. So we noted the total time for completing these 2 tasks. After that was done, he asked that we write going back and forth between the letters and the numbers, like we will do when we're doing 2 tasks at the same time. So we wrote A1, B2, C3, D4, and so forth. Now, the time we took to do the multitasking was a lot more than when we did both tasks one after the other. It took as much as 50 to 70% more time to multitask. So he made a point that that multitasking doesn't really save us time. Actually, by focusing on one task at a time, we are more efficient. Give it a try and you will see that focusing on one task is faster than multitasking. To continue on, the researchers made a point that digital addiction is not our fault, but a result of the tech industry's desire to increase corporate profits. So it's more about more clicks, more money, and so forth. Push notifications, vibrations, and other alerts on our phones and computers make us feel compelled to look at them by triggering the same neural pathways in our brains that once alerted us to imminent danger, like, say, an attack by a tiger or a snake. But now we are hijacked by those same mechanisms that once protected us and allow us to survive for the most trivial pieces of information, according to the researchers. But just as we can train ourselves to, say, eat less sugar or salt, for example, we can take charge and train ourselves to be less addicted to our phones and computers, the first thing we need to do is to recognize that tech companies are manipulating our biological responses to dangers. So by turning off push notifications and only responding to email and social media at specific times would help us to get away from reacting to alerts and notifications from our phones. And this will give us the much needed uninterrupted time to focus on more important tasks. To go to the extreme would be to close off all social media accounts and push ourselves to have face-to-face connections with people. Whatever method you use, realize that we are being taken advantage of by all the push notifications, which companies are using to get more hits, more impressions, and clicks, so that they can continue to up their revenue. Only you and me individually can stop ourselves from having our biological responses abused. Due to the large number of Android smartphone manufacturers and the many carriers of Android phones, security updates are not regularly pushed out and applied across all Android devices at the same time. Some may take months before pushing out patches and other security updates. And this is an issue that is widely known. But there is something more troubling if you're an Android user. A German security firm found that many Android phone vendors fail to make patches available to their users or delay their release for months. They sometimes also tell users that their phone's firmware is fully up to date, even while they've secretly skipped patches. So get this, users are being led to believe that their phone system is up to date by the vendors, while the vendors are skipping these patches. In other words, they're not making them available. For 2 years, this security firm reverse engineered hundreds of Android phones. They looked at the operating system code and checked to see if each device actually contained the security patches indicated in its settings. They found that what they call the patch gap. In many cases, certain vendors' phone would tell users that they had all of Android's security patches up to a certain date, while in reality, they're missing as many as a dozen patches from that period. Of course, this is a no-no, leaving phones and users vulnerable to being hacked. According to one of the researchers, he said, "We find that there's a gap between patching claims and the actual patches installed on the device. It's small for some devices and pretty significant for others. In the worst cases," he said, Android phone manufacturers intentionally misrepresented when the device had last been patched. Sometimes these guys just change the date without installing any patches, he said. Probably for marketing reasons. They just set the patch level to almost a date or whatever looks best, he said. The company tested the firmware of 1,200 phones from more than a dozen phone manufacturers for every Android patch released in 2017. The devices were made by Google itself as well as other major Android phone manufacturers like Samsung, Motorola, and HTC, and also the lesser-known Chinese-owned companies like ZTE and TCL. Their findings, they found that Google's own flagship phones like the Pixel and Pixel 2, and even top-tier phone vendors sometimes claimed to have patches installed that they actually lacked. And also the lower-tiered collection of manufacturers were even worse. What is bad about this is that they are telling their customers that they have installed patches when they didn't. This, of course, is creating a false sense of security for users. This is a deception from these vendors. One example that was highlighted was Samsung's 2016 J3 phone, which claimed to have every Android patch installed in 2017. But according to the security findings, it lacked 12 of them. And of these 12, 2 are considered as critical for the phone's security. And this is from Samsung, a company that you would think is at the top of the game regarding security updates. Now, this, of course, is not across all of Samsung's phones, so I just wanted to clarify that. It was just noted for the J3s only. To help users understand the state of security updates for their phones, the security company is releasing an update to its Android app called the Snoop Snitch, and that will let users check their phone's code for the actual state of its security updates. As part of their findings, phones from major Android vendors like Nokia had on average between 1 and 3 missing patches. HTC, Motorola, and LG missed between 3 and 4 patches. And the lowest performing companies on the list were Chinese firms TCL and ZTE, all of whose phones had on average more than 4 patches that they've claimed to have installed but hadn't. If you're running any of these phones, be sure to check out the status of your security updates with the Snoop Snitch app from Android. We've come a long way from the early days of virtual receptionists directing callers to press 0 for an attendant, to the voice typing software transcribing audio recordings, to now the days of Siri, Alexa, Cortana, and Google Assistant. IT research firm Gartner predicts that many touch-required tasks on mobile apps will become voice-activated within the next several years. So the voice feature of our devices are becoming more common these days. It wasn't too long ago when voice was a uniquely human attribute. Today that is changing rapidly with personal assistants like Siri and others who are trying to become more human sounding. What is missing though, according to a voice expert in these virtual personal assistants, is the vocal quality most associated with warmth. For example, when you listen to the 3 Siri voices samples from the 3 different systems, that's the iOS 9 in 2015, iOS 10 2016, and the iOS 11 in 2017, as the versions progressed from iOS 9, the actual pitch of the voice becomes much higher and higher. The expert said that by raising the pitch, what people hear in iOS 11 is a more energized, optimistic sounding voice, and it's also a younger sound. The higher pitch is less about the woman's voice being commanding and more about creating a warmer, friendlier vocal presence that will appeal to the many generations, especially millennials, he said. In the book Wired for Speech, How Voice Activates and Advances the Human-Computer Relationship, the authors, Clifford Nass and Scott Brave, explored the relationships among technology, gender, and authority. According to their research, men like a male computer voice more than a female computer voice, and women like a female voice more than a male one. But they found that both men and women are more likely to follow instructions from a male computer voice, even if a female computer voice relays the same information. Another finding was a female voice computer is seen as a better teacher of love and relationships and a worse teacher of technical subjects than a male voiced computer. Although computers do not have genders, the mere representation of gender is enough to trigger stereotyped assumptions. According to the book, a sales company might implement a male or female voice depending on the task. For example, a male voice would be a logical choice for an initial sales function. For complaints, a female voice would be better. For rigid policy of, say, for no refunds, no returns, the interface would benefit from a male voice. So in looking for the perfect voice is the wrong angle. The future is no longer about developing a single ideal voice that appeals to the widest audience possible. What we need is to create a voice that, like ours, changes in response to the human beings around it. And getting there is an issue. The virtual voices today are slightly robotic and non-contextual. There is the individuality of the voice, but they lack the diversity and the responsivity. Could a personal assistant someday listen to its users, detect stress, and then respond to match the tone, phrasing, and the tempo accordingly? That will be the ideal voice. That will sound more like a human's voice that adjusts itself in real time throughout the day. If this is successful, this is what we will be interacting with in the near future. A voice, just like ours, that can match our tempo and mood and respond like a friend that is sitting next to us. Thanks for taking the time to join us today on WRLWND Radio. This is Marcelo Segre from the team here at WRLWND saying stay safe in the technology whirlwind.